Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sunday's live stream. We're going to get right into the questions here. It is a beautiful day in St. Bart's. We're going to do some cliff jumping later on, some ocean swimming. I'm all set and ready to go. As a reminder for all of you who want to check out Rebel Capitalist Pro, I've got Gene, the guy that's in charge of my digital marketing stuff. He's got a super awesome promotion going on. It's $1 for a week-long trial, if my memory serves me right. So go check that out. That's the online forum I have with Chris McIntosh and the wonderful Miss Lynn Alden. You guys are going to absolutely love it. You can check it out at georgegammon.com/pro. But let's get right into the questions. That's what everyone is here for. And make sure, guys, that when you do have a question, you need to submit it to the live stream. Start with question in all capital letters, and that helps me see it when the live stream gets pretty quick here. So let me go to the top and pull a random question here. Let's see. Question, I think IYPO. I'm not down with the acronyms. I think that's in your personal opinion, or maybe in my professional opinion. I don't know. We'll say in your personal opinion. Can the inflation policy path central banks have taken be stopped politically, or are too many people in the financial position that depend on inflation for success? Well, I don't think it's going to be stopped politically, because politically, there's no one more in favor of inflation than politicians because it reduces the amount of their debt burden because they can pay the debt back with cheaper dollars, assuming that they're getting more tax receipts. That's one thing that people don't really think about. They say, well, if we get inflation, then that's good because the government pays it back with cheaper dollars, just like I just said. But they forget that the inflation doesn't do the government any good. It doesn't do any debtor really good at all if their source of income isn't increasing. So I won't get off on a tangent too much here, but you can envision a situation. I've gone over it in whiteboards or in whiteboard videos where the government, although we do have inflation, call it 5-10% inflation, their receipts actually go down. So my point is, just because we get consumer price inflation, it doesn't necessarily mean that the burden of debt, the 26, probably 27 trillion now, the burden goes down or gets easier to bear, easier to pay. So my short answer there is I don't think it's going to be stopped by politicians because they want it more than anyone else. Okay, boy, this is a really. I think sometimes you guys ask questions. The questions are great, but I think a lot of times you guys ask questions that you think are rather simple, and on the surface they are, but to give you a really complete answer, we really have to dive into the weeds. So let's get into this, and I won't dive too much into the weeds. I'll try to keep it pretty surface level. Question regarding your Schiff interview. You and Schiff suggested the Fed money printing, quote unquote, causes the stock market to go higher. Can you explain the mechanism for how Fed causes the increase? So first and foremost, and I might have I don't know if Peter sees it this way. I think he does, but I haven't asked him this question specifically. But the way I see it is the Fed doesn't cause the stock market to go up. The Fed can't do that. It could in the future if it starts to buy, if it went in and bought stocks, which I'm not going to put it past them. But what they've done in the past as far as quantitative easing doesn't have a direct effect on the stock market. Indirectly, obviously it does. So you've got two components there. Number one is you're adding balance sheet capacity to the commercial banking system potentially, and that's a whole another rabbit hole. There's some super smart people that would say that you're not. But from my standpoint, as far as my opinion right now, it's going to give the banks more capacity to loan, right? Because they're getting reserves which they can lend against. Therefore, technically, they can create more loans if they wanted to. And so if they have more balance sheet capacity, then they can extend loans or extend purchasing power to hedge funds and financial institutions to go in there and buy the stocks, which makes the market go up. So it's this, it's like a two-pronged approach. Number one, you're adding balance sheet capacity. Number two, the Fed has just psychologically trained the market. It's like this Pavlovian response that when they do QE, that's a Fed put. So you got to go long. You've got to buy stocks. So when they've got this, and a lot of people think that the Fed, there's a direct correlation, and a lot of people that manage quite a bit of money. So if you've got this Pavlovian response, plus you're giving additional balance sheet capacity for the primary dealer banks and the banks under the Fed's umbrella to create more loans to these financial institutions and hedge funds to go in and buy financial assets, then you get financial assets going up. But it wasn't a direct result of the Fed doing anything, right? So if the banks didn't use that balance sheet capacity, and if the hedge funds and the financial institutions didn't believe there was a Fed put or a government put or whatever, then whatever the Fed could take their balance sheet to a quadrillion, and it wouldn't necessarily do anything. So it really all depends. It's still they're reliant, the Fed, they reliant on a third party in order to make that happen. So and whether that third party is the government or a commercial bank or the players within the financial system itself. Okay, next question. Do you believe it is possible the Fed can move everyone into their digital currency before the bubbles pop and avoid any chance of our market collapse? Well, they're never going to avoid any chance. That's there's always a chance. Now, what probability? That's a different question, but there's always going to be a chance of the market collapsing. And I don't know that the digital currency, I mean, you're talking about like a Fed coin. And if you had to download like the Fed app or the Freedom app, I always call it, because it, as Ron Paul says, it always does the opposite of what the name is. So if you have to download the Freedom app on your phone and then the Fed just transfers Fed coins to you, and see, that's weird. I threw that out on Twitter the other day, because then you've got to ask, I mean, if that's a liability on the Fed's balance sheet, what's the asset? I guess they could treat it like a loan. I've been reading the Federal Reserve Act quite a bit this weekend, actually. And if you look at section 16-2, it shows how that, and I don't think this is, originally, it wasn't meant for QE, but I think this maybe, I'm not sure, but it may be where they're getting their legal ability, let's say, and this combined with section 14. But section 16.2 is about the Federal, or it's about getting notes, Federal Reserve notes, in other words, legal tender, cash to the member banks, and this is done in the way of a loan, and those member banks have to put up collateral for however many currency units or however many notes that they need. And again, this goes back to the days where we didn't have all this digital dollars and these the type of bank reserve system that we have now. So I think that could be where they're getting this this type of quantitative easing. And as far as kind of transferring that to your question here, about a digital currency, I don't know. My main point is I'm not sure how they would. I know how they put the liability on their balance sheet, but as far as the asset, I don't know. I don't know if that would be a loan technically to the average Joes and Janes that are getting the let's call it UBI. But anyway, that's not the main point here. I'm getting off on a tangent. So your main question is about digital currency and can they use this to prop up the bubbles? I don't know that would be their purpose. I think their purpose would be more to directly inject M2 money supply or broad money, increase the money that was chasing goods and services, and increase velocity, because they could put a timestamp or an expiration on the Fed coins they give you. So if you get $2,000, let's say, in Fed coins, they could say, okay, you've got to spend it in 30 days or poof, it's gone out of your app. It's no longer credits on your app. So I think that's kind of their motivation there. I think they've got other ways to prop up the market. I mean, whether it's a special purpose vehicle, again, it's completely counter to the Federal Reserve Act. But the more I read the Federal Reserve Act, the more it seems like to me that they're already in violation of it. If I don't know if you guys follow me on Twitter or anything, but I just put up a tweet where, man, if you read Section 14, it looks like they just have been ignoring that for years, maybe decades. So, well, at least since 2008, 2009. Okay, so when talking about your 10-80-10 insurance income speculation allocation, do you count cash as insurance, or I leave it out altogether? Yeah, I just I don't include the cash in there. Just the way I separate it in my mind, it's a completely separate line item. It's just what I have invested. Okay, do I see any market crash happening around October 5th? I don't know. I mean, you can't time these things. Who knows? I think there's a great argument for the stock market just continue to go up and just have a blow off top. I think there's a great argument. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying that's my base case, but I think there's really, really strong argument, especially when you listen to the interview Mike Green had with Bill Fleckenstein and Grant Williams the other day on their Endgame podcast. If you guys haven't checked that out, I know I've talked about it a lot. You definitely should, because it shows how the markets are really being manipulated right now. Manipulated might be a strong word, but how the markets are being pushed in one direction that they most likely wouldn't go because of these passive flows, because they don't have any decision-making process other than if they have $1 come into the fund, they have to take that dollar and they have to buy the index. They have to buy whatever is in their basket of assets that the person that gave them the money is trying to get exposure to. So where an active manager would sit there and say, okay, what's the price? What are the fundamentals? What are the technicals? There's none of that decision-making process at all. So you have the market getting increasingly distorted, I think is the best way to say it. The higher percentage of assets that goes from active into passive. And at the beginning of 2000, I mean, we were like 10% in passive funds. Now we're almost 50%. It's a big deal. And as we get closer to 100, according to Mike Green, you're going to see wild volatility. And I'm actually going to interview Mike this Friday, September 4th. So stay tuned for that. Okay, Michael's asking if the Fed will confiscate change. I don't think so. I just think that they'll do some sort of UBI where you just have to have it on your phone, and if you want to use currency, then they'll probably charge you like a premium. Like if you want to use a $5 bill at Starbucks, they'll charge you like $4.50 for the coffee instead of $4, and so no one's going to want to use cash, so they're just going to exchange their cash for Fed coins because they don't want to pay the premium. I think that's probably how they'd work cash out of the system. Or, I mean, maybe it has something to do with the cerveza sickness where they just, I mean, fortunately it hasn't got to this point yet, but where they just say you can't use cash anymore because it's dangerous. You know, you transfer the virus or something like that. So, George, can you comment briefly on what's going on with the price of gold right now? Why the price has been fluctuating even in inflation might be looming ahead? Because you're dealing with a market that's got buyers and sellers, and I mean nothing's going to go up in a straight line. It's, in fact, if it does go up in a straight line, that's not a healthy bull market. That's when you get a parabolic chart, that's not sustainable most of the time. So it's just you got different opinions. You've got people that want to, and then you've got liquidity issues. I mean, everyone that sells gold isn't necessarily selling gold just because they think the price is going to go down. A lot of people sell it for who knows. Who knows? I mean, maybe they get a divorce and they got to give their wife or husband half of their assets, so there's a forced liquidation. I mean, honestly, you never know why people sell stuff. It isn't necessarily because they think the price is going down, and they might need the liquidity. They might have just had it as a hedge. I mean, who knows? So that's just normal. I mean, in a bull market, in anything, not just gold, it's going to go up. It's going to go down, down, down. It's going to go up, 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 then down, 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 up, 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 up. It just goes over the span of 2 or 3 years. It just has a lot more up days than down days, and it on net balance it goes up more. So I really wouldn't focus too much on just the price action. Thoughts on digital run and hypervelocity volatility? I am not sure what that is, my friend. Thoughts on digital run and hypervelocity. I mean, I think we could have some wild volatility in the future. But I don't know that that's your question. Yeah, I mean, I like other metals. I like commodities. So the question is, do you recommend investing in other things other than metals, like uranium, copper, platinum? I mean, I suggest just buying stuff when it's cheap. And uranium and copper, I think, are pretty darn cheap when you look at a chart of them historically adjusted for inflation. So not that you can buy the direct asset. You can't go out and buy a bag of uranium. Not that I know of. Maybe at Home Depot sells them. but assuming Home Depot doesn't sell a bag of uranium, you've got to buy it like a producer if you want exposure to it. But I think that said, you just got to compartmentalize it in your portfolio. For me, it's not an investment. It's not insurance. It's just a speculation. And I don't like to have a higher allocation than 10% of my portfolio for speculative purchases. So whether it's uranium, copper, platinum, even silver, the miners, they're all speculations to me. The only thing that's insurance there would be gold. And so that's a different part of the portfolio. But again, I don't want to recommend anything because I'm not an expert. I can just tell you what I'm doing. And what I'm doing is just the 10% to gold. And then back in March, I bought uranium. I didn't buy copper though. But I'm open to that. I'm very open to that. If I get some time to do a little research, then I'll probably, or I might buy some. But I bought the gold miners back then But it's really just kind of being agnostic and just buying what's cheap and selling what's expensive. The question is, when am I going to get Richard Werner on the podcast? I've asked him several times, and he knows. I mention him on Twitter, and I just tell people, I say, Richard has an open invitation to be interviewed or to come on the show, the Rebel Capital show, whenever he wants. And he always, acknowledges that by liking it or whatever. So he knows that he's got an open invitation. I don't want to bother the guy, really. It's if he'll come on when he wants to come on. And would the podcast be 3 hours long? Probably. I mean, if he's open to it, I could talk to him all day long. So hopefully, maybe he'll be a little more receptive to it once we get to the 250,000 mark with the subscribers. I think we're at about 175,000 right now. So maybe if I can continue to grow the subscriber base, then that will give me some access to some other people that I might not have had the opportunity to interview, and Richard might fall into that category. Okay, so as we hear from Dr. Lacey Hunt and Brent Johnson that QE is not inflationary but deflationary, at least in the current form, what explains then the rise in equities in the U.S. and elsewhere? Well, it goes back to what I was saying before, is where they're talking about it being deflationary because, in their opinion, it's taking usable cash out of the system, and it's replacing it with bank reserves that really don't have any functionality whatsoever other than to back up new loans. That's their opinion. There are different opinions. Lynn has a different opinion, and these people are way smarter than I am. That's for sure. The only thing I can do is explain each of their angles and how they see things. But it really, I think, boils down to how you interpret the Federal Reserve Act and its legalese. It's tough reading, and I don't know that anyone has all the answers, regardless of how smart they are. So I would encourage you to read, everything Brent's saying about it. Obviously, listen to Dr. Lacey Hunt whenever you can. Read everything that Lynn is putting out there. And I'm going to do a whiteboard video on it this week and just absorb as much as you can, and then just come to your own conclusions on what you think is right or wrong. But I'd strongly suggest reading the Federal Reserve Act, not the whole thing, but mainly Section 14 and 16. And it won't take you that long, but you probably have to read it a few times for it to make sense. But just go straight to the source, and then make your own decisions as to what it's saying. And I'm going to try to explain it to you guys this week on the whiteboard. So I want to be clear there that's why they're saying it's deflationary. Let's see. And it goes back, your question goes back to what I was saying before, is although it is, even in Dr. Hunt and Brent's eyes, taking liquidity or cash out of the system, it's still giving them as much balance sheet capacity, and so because they have the bank reserves that they can lend on, and then also too, if we got to remember that even if it's taking cash off the balance sheet of the primary dealer banks, and even if they're replacing it with reserves, that cash is going into the TGA, the Treasury General Account, and what are they going to do with it? They're going to spend that cash out into the real economy. So I would argue that I don't know it's deflationary. I think it might be a wash, but if they're buying the debt, especially if it's debt that is coming straight off of a treasury auction towards deficit spending, and that's a whole other tangent. But if you think about it, that it's basically just taking cash from the balance sheet of the banks and putting it on the balance sheet of the consumer. So even if it's a net wash for broad money, most likely you're going to have it circulating in the economy at a faster rate, which means velocity goes up. So there's a lot of cross currents, to say the least, but I don't know that it reduces the money supply directly, even if they're taking the cash off of the balance sheets. If we're just talking about the primary dealer banks buying it from auction and then directly selling it to the Fed the next day, it meaning the treasuries. If it's just treasuries that are on the balance sheet that the banks have already purchased and have been on the balance sheet for a long time, and the money has already gone from the private sector to the government, and they've spent it back into then it's a little different, right? I mean, this gets very nuanced and very complex based on the different scenario, right? And you've got this one main scenario, but you've got variations of it that can lead to much different conclusions and much different outcomes based on how you tweak each variable, right? So it's and unfortunately, if you're trying to figure out the inflation deflation debate, which all of us are trying to do, because I mean it's so darn important for everybody, for understanding the dollar, for understanding asset prices, bonds. I mean, everything goes back to this. And unfortunately, there is no easy answer. There's no just cut and dry, this is how it is, move on. So my best advice is to read those two sections, 14 and 16 of the Federal Reserve Act, and then start trying to think it through yourself. And then watch my whiteboard video this week, because I'm really going to try to do my very, very best to outline it, everyone's position, in a way that is super, super easy to understand. Yeah, see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Question: are the primary dealer banks using reserves to buy equities? It's they could be, they may not be. I mean, even I've talked to people in the last couple of days, and when I mean people, I mean pros, experts, that believe that the bank reserves are not legal tender, and to the extent that they can't be used to buy anything. So what makes this even more complicated is you've got camps of individuals that believe that these bank reserves can't be used at all, or aren't quote unquote dollars. They're not cash. And then you've got, within that subgroup, you have different people that believe that they cannot be used for anything other than lending. But then there's others that see have a hybrid approach that say, well, it can be used for lending, but it also can be used to buy financial assets from other banks that have an account at the Fed. So the reserves just go back and forth from one account to the other, and the only thing that happens is the financial assets that are being bought just go from one bank's balance sheet to the other bank's balance sheet, and then the reserves just go whoop and they just trade basically bank reserves for financial assets. But those people would argue that the primary dealer banks can't use the bank reserves to actually buy the treasuries at auction. And that's kind of the line in the sand, if you will. So, I mean, to try to figure out what they're allowed to do with these bank reserves, I don't think anyone knows for sure. I think everyone is trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together using as much, charts, data. It's a lot like the euro dollar market. Whenever you hear Snyder talk about it, he's like, listen, nobody knows how big this thing is because there's no spreadsheet, there's no data that says this is how many euro dollars are out there. You just have to kind of try to figure out an approximation based on everything else that's happening around it, and saying, okay, well, if this is happening, then most likely this is happening. So as an example, Lynn's got a bunch of charts that shows how it would be very difficult for something to be taking place based on the Fed's balance sheet and the bank's cash positions. It would be very difficult for bank reserves to not be legal tender. But that's just a chart. I mean, that who knows how they're coming to the conclusion, or who knows where they're getting the data or the source for the data that we're seeing on that specific chart, right? I mean, we can't audit the Fed. So you're just trying to come to a conclusion based on data that isn't directly pertaining to the conclusion that you're trying to draw. So that's why you can get all these people that are just wildly smart and have done ridiculous amounts of research, just not seeing eye to eye on this. It goes back to the interpretation of the Federal Reserve Act. And I'm going to meet my buddy Robert Barnes in Vegas when I go back there, and we're going to grab dinner. And if you guys don't know Robert, he's kind of the constitutional lawyer, the free speech lawyer that I have on the Rebel Capitalist show every once in a while. And he's kind of my go-to guy because he just knows the law so well. And I'm going to maybe show him these couple paragraphs in the Federal Reserve Act and see what his take is on it, because it's, lawyers understand that lingo a lot better than we do. So anyway, I don't want to get too much off on a tangent, but it's just such a important question. And that is, what can bank reserves be used for? And what can they not be used for? That I think everything revolves around that question, whether it's dollar, equities, bonds, inflation, deflation. It all revolves around that. And if you've got, I would go so far to say, is if you have an opinion on inflation and deflation, and you haven't asked yourself the question, what can bank reserves do and what they can't do, that your opinion on inflation, deflation is incomplete. And I would go so far as to say that about someone's opinion on the dollar, on equities, on bonds, pretty much everything, as far as if it's dollar denominated, even real estate. I mean, here's Chris is asking a similar question. Hypothetically speaking, if the Fed can write its own rules, why wouldn't they inflate? Inflation is the only chance to avoid insolvency. How is insolvency better than government cancellation? Because, so, yeah. even if the Federal Reserve Act is violating some rules, they might not be violating all the rules, right? We just don't know what rules they're violating. And the way I read Section 14, they are in massive violation. But I could be reading it wrong. As far as I think, and I'm going to go over this on my whiteboard video this week, the line in the sand could be, and I'm not saying that it is, I'm saying it could be, I'm just throwing this out there, that they can't create deposits in the commercial banking system. That's how they would define printing money compared to just what they have been doing, right? And I think maybe when Dr. Lacey Hunt is talking about turning bank reserves into legal tender, maybe, and I haven't talked to Dr. Hunt, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but maybe he could be referring to creating a deposit in the commercial banking system. So as an example, if a primary dealer bank buys whatever, bonds, stocks, gold, whatever it is from another bank that's within the Fed system, if they can use bank reserves, and all it is, the bank reserves just go from bank A to bank B, and the gold goes from bank B to bank A. Done, handled. There hasn't been any more deposits created. In fact, zero deposits have been created in the commercial banking system, because the only thing that's the only place where a transaction has occurred is on the Fed's balance sheet, just on the liability side of the balance sheet where these bank reserves are, meaning bank reserves went from the buyer to the seller. And then on the bank's balance sheet, the asset side, the gold just went from the seller to the buyer. As far as deposits that are bank liabilities of the commercial banking system, and that's the amount of dollars, currency units that are chasing a certain amount of goods and services, there has been no change to that whatsoever. None. Zero, right? So maybe that's how some people are defining, or maybe that's how the Federal Reserve Act, I don't know. But that's what would make sense to me. And I that said, I could change my mind an hour from now. But I think that might be where the line is drawn. But again, to your point, the Fed could just, they're writing their own rules. There's certain parts of the Federal Reserve Act that I think they're totally ignoring. And you say, well, the spirit of the act. Well, how are they sticking by the spirit of the act when they're out there setting up special purpose vehicles to buy junk debt? Does that coincide with the spirit? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. So I don't think there's an argument where you could say, I think the Federal Reserve is abiding by not only all of the guidelines, but also the spirit of the Federal Reserve Act by what they've been doing since March. And to your point, if they're willing to cross that line, why wouldn't they cross another line, and then another line, and then another line? And no one calls them out on it. Do we have any politicians calling them out for creating these special purpose vehicles to bail out or to buy junk debt or corporate debt? No. Politicians, they don't even get this. They go cross-eyed. You talk about this for 2 minutes with any politician. And so they're not going to get, who's going to call out the Fed? Just some guy on YouTube, some named George Gammon with a channel. Honestly, they've got no one calling them out. So what's to prevent them from just crossing another line and another line and another line? I don't know that there is anything, and I'm open to being wrong. Let me read your question one more time, because I know I went off on a tangent there. I apologize. Let me make sure I got to the meat of your question. Hypothetically speaking, as the Fed writes its own rules, why wouldn't they inflate? Inflation is the only thing. Yeah. So that's really, I think if they want to inflate, they, especially after looking at Japan and what's happened with the ECB and taking their interest rates negative, and how that didn't create the type of inflation, if you use the government statistics, that they wanted. I think, I mean, they're going to look at that and they say, okay, well, Japan tried to create inflation and they didn't. Then why didn't they? Okay, they did X, Y, and Z. All right, well, if we want inflation, we're going to do A, B, and C. We're not going to do X, Y, and Z. If I mean, that's what I would do if I was at the Fed. Call me crazy. I mean, if they tried to execute or try to produce inflation the same way the BOJ did, I mean, isn't that the definition of insanity? So I think that my point is, I think that they're going to, let's say, stretch the spirit of the Federal Reserve Act more and more and more, just like they have the Constitution. Yeah, see, this is a great point. Gary asked, how long do you think it will be before we start seeing carnage in the streets of America, aka homeless wave after all the evictions, foreclosures? Do you anticipate social unrest coming? Short answer, yes, I do, unfortunately. And I think that this is a great point, that right now we're, like when I was in Fort Lauderdale, as an example, there, you got one main drag there, and I can't, you guys probably know what it is. I can't recall right off the top of my head. But that's where all the restaurants and the cafes and the art galleries and whatnot. So when you're walking down there during the day, a lot of them are closed. And you just kind of assume that, oh, well, they're just closed because of COVID. And once we're done with the cerveza sickness, once we get a vaccine or whatever, whenever it's in the rearview mirror, then they're just going to, bam, everyone's going to go back to work, and they're going to flip on the light switch, and those businesses are just going to be running at the exact same rate that they were running before. But what we don't understand is that a lot of these businesses are gone. Bust. They're not coming back. I know, as a business owner, I mean, you name almost any business I had before I retired, and you've only got so much runway. You've only got so much money in the bank to weather a storm. And when that money's gone, you're bust. You're out of business. And if you went out of business a month ago, and let's say 2 months from now, COVID is magically gone, well, you're already out of business. You're not coming back. Those employees are done. There's once you go out of business, you're done. It doesn't matter what happens with the cerveza sickness. So I think my point is, when you walk down the street, you're seeing a lot of these businesses that are shut down, or that are, the doors are closed, they're not open. And we just think, oh, well, it's just because of the cerveza sickness, and we just think that they're magically going to come back. But what happens when the cerveza sickness is in the rearview mirror for whatever reason, and you walk down the main drag in Fort Lauderdale, and it looks the exact same? Those businesses are still closed. So you say, well, the government can give UBI and I think they'll do that. I think they'll try to prop up the economy with money printing, and however you would define it, proper money printing. But I think it'll exacerbate the problem, and it'll misallocate even more resources. And then if you look at what what tools they have at their disposal, whether it's QE, whether it's dropping interest rates lower, whether it has a direct effect on the stock market, which I don't think it does, but in the past, it's led to the stock market going up for reasons we talked about earlier. Therefore, you could say that anything the Fed does to try to prop up the market or prop up the economy is going to exacerbate the wealth gap. And I can't recall the podcast I was listening to the other day, but it might have been the Endgame with Grant and Bill. But anyway, regardless, what they were saying is that, oh no, actually it was Joe Rogan with Brett Weinstein. And that's where I heard it. And Brett has done quite a bit of research on it. And he said that what's interesting about social unrest is historically it hasn't been strictly based on the standard of living of those at the bottom end of the economic spectrum. So in other words, it's not solely a result of how well the poor are doing or how poorly they're doing, right? Really what it's more about is the gap. So if you have poor people, quote unquote poor, that are actually doing very well, relatively speaking, maybe to other countries. And I'm not saying that the poor people in the United States, they should be glad that they're not in Africa. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that it's not so much about the standard of living of those at the bottom, but it's about the gap, right? So even if we can think of this hypothetical world where even the poorest people in the United States were making $100,000 a year, and let's say in today's dollars, so they had a substantial amount of purchasing power. If the wealth gap was even greater than it is today, by what Brett was saying, the social unrest would be even greater. So you think about that in the context or through the lens of the tools that the Fed has at their disposal. And I don't know how you come to a conclusion that the social unrest in the United States is going to get better. I don't know how you can connect those dots. And I hope I'm wrong. And I would love to hear an argument, a rational argument that that has another opinion that social unrest is going to get better. It's going to. I just don't see it happening. Especially with the election. I mean, my goodness. Whew. That's. I can tell you one thing. There's one place I will not be during the election, and that is in the United States. There's no way I would be in the United States during the election. Yeah, this is interesting. Sean is asking, or what's my time here, guys? I got to be really cognizant of the time. 48 minutes. Okay. Sean is asking, Robert Barnes, my buddy, the lawyer I mentioned, stated that it is only a matter of time before the U.S. does forced vaccines to work travel. What's your opinion on Brazil? Yeah, this is a tough question. I don't even want to think about that. I don't even want to think about the U.S. or any country for that matter forcing people to be vaccinated in order for them to go into a restaurant or to get on an airplane or to travel in public transportation or go into a commercial building or go into a mall or go to a concert. That is a slippery slope that I want no part of whatsoever. And if it came down to, okay, George, you've got two options. You can either be vaccinated and have some more flexibility, get on planes and whatnot, or if you don't get vaccinated, then you're done. You're not going. You can't. You can leave your house, but you've got to live out like Grizzly Adams somewhere. You've got to you got to live like off grid. You got to grow your own food and stuff, because you're not going to be able to go into any public buildings, or you can't go into a grocery store. You can't do anything. Obviously, I hope it doesn't come to that, but the probability isn't zero. And so I like Brazil, maybe not from an economic standpoint. I haven't looked into it too extensively, but from a freedom standpoint, it could be interesting. Maybe not now, but moving forward, especially what I've talked to Chris McIntosh about quite extensively behind the scenes, is there are quite a few countries that don't benefit from the direction the United States is headed, and most of the developed economies. And it's his belief, and he makes a very strong argument, that the countries that won't benefit are going to be the countries that will have the most personal and economic freedom moving forward. And it's incredibly counterintuitive, because it's pretty much the countries that right now have some of the least amount of, or what we would consider, just based on our kind of stereotype of these countries that we have in the West, would be the least free. But he's got a great argument. So I would look at Brazil. I would look at, if I was just trying to figure out where I'm going to have the most personal freedom in 5 years, if the developed world comes down with this, call it this vaccination mandate, where you've got to take this vaccination, and you don't know what's in it. You don't know. I mean, I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but based on the data from the cerveza sickness and the group that it targets, I think I'm at a incredibly low risk group, and I would prefer, all things being equal, not to take a vaccine. I don't think I really need it, and I would like to have the choice to do that. But it might not be my decision. And if it comes down to having to make that decision, I know personally, I'm going to be looking at what your options are. And you might look into some of those countries that would be less likely to impose that type of mandate. So that would be countries like Brazil. That would be countries, some countries in the Middle East. That would be countries in Eastern Europe. That would be Russia, and some of the others. Hopefully this is all just talk and just kind of a thought experiment. And I sincerely hope we never have to worry about it, really, or it never comes to that. As far as Richard's asking my second citizenship, I've got the visa, and once you have the visa, it's just kind of, you wait for Colombia. And it reminds me, I'm supposed to call Andrew Henderson this weekend to talk to him about a St. Lucia passport. My sister and I are thinking about buying. I think you can get like a family pack or something. It's like a Costco passport, but for St. Lucia. So I need to get some time here to call Andrew. But yeah, as far as the Colombian passport, it's just kind of, I've got the visa, I've got all the qualifications. It's just, you have to wait, I think 35 years, something like that, until you can fill out an application for the passport. As far as St. Lucia, which is one I've thought about buying, it's kind of a work in progress. I'll definitely let you guys know how it's going. Oh, Jerry's asking a great question. What non-subscription real estate resources would you recommend for new investor to educate themselves before committing capital? In short, how did you learn? Thank you. Podcasts. And obviously, I'm going to recommend my really good buddy Jason Hartman. just the Creating Wealth show. I think that's a fantastic source of information. I would also suggest going online and looking at Bigger Pockets. It's an online forum that you can participate. It's totally free of charge. I think they've got some, maybe like a premium membership though, but just being a free member of the community, you get access to, I think, pretty much everything you need, especially if you're just trying to learn. So it's like one of these online forums. It's kind of like Rebel Capitalist Pro, where you can start like your own thread and people have questions and you've got pros that go in there and answer it. You can get like badges and stuff, but that's a great source of information for a newbie online. So I'd start there. And then the Real Estate Guys, that's a podcast I used to listen to quite a bit. They were pretty good. And so Hartman, Real Estate, I think Bigger Pockets actually has a podcast as well. So I would start there. Okay, guys, bear with me here. I'm just trying to find a couple more questions. When will I interview Steve Van Meter? Done. I interviewed Steve on Friday. So that interview will be posted tomorrow. That's tomorrow night's Rebel Capitalist show. Oh, it's moving fast. Okay, so Puerto Rico, will the U.S. government change tax benefits and make PR less friendly to being a place to escape mainland U.S.? I don't know that that's up to the United States government. Unless they change the kind of law that governs the relationship they have with Puerto Rico. I think that would be more of a Puerto Rican thing. I think your biggest risk there, Paul, is if Puerto Rico becomes a state, then you're done. Then the way I understand it, and I could be wrong, but the way I understand it, if they were to be the 51st state, Act 20 and 22 is poof, bye-bye. But the reason number one, that would take a while. And number two, I mean, if you're making a significant amount of money and you're paying 2, 3, 4, 500 grand a year in tax, I mean, so what? So you get the advantage for, let's say, 4 years before they become a state. Who cares? I mean, okay, so you didn't get it for 25 years or 30 years or the rest of your life. Does it matter? You still just saved $2 million. So, I mean, it's not like they can retroactively tax you for the past 4 or 5 years. So that's why I don't really see the downside to Puerto Rico at all. If you're someone who has that type of business or you have those types of capital gains. So I don't really worry too much about, oh my gosh, is this going to be there forever? Because even if it's not, for me, it's still a fantastic deal for however long it does last. Okay, let's get one more question here. Okay, Juan is asking me if I agree with Lacey Hunt. So it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about deflation. I do. Well, let me be clear. Do I agree with Lacey Hunt about deflation? Yes, I do. Where I have a different, and I don't want to say I disagree with Dr. Hunt, because I mean, who am I, right, to to disagree with Dr. Hunt? Where I would see things slightly different is the Fed's willingness to completely ignore the Federal Reserve Act. And so if to Dr. Hunt's point, if they have to abide by the Federal Reserve Act, I personally would be on the deflationist camp. I get it. I totally understand the deflationist argument. And I could argue it very, very well. In fact, I have on some whiteboard videos. So I think that's when you guys are listening to people on YouTube or in podcasts, always remember, and this is just my opinion, that if someone truly understands their position, they can argue the other side just as well as they can argue their own position. They can argue the other side of the debate, maybe even better than they can argue their side. To me, that's a sign that guy, that gal, okay, they've done a lot of research here. If they can argue the other side of the debate just as well as they can argue their side, they've got a good level of comprehension. So my point is, I don't want to toot my own horn here. That's not what I'm doing. But I think I have the luxury, let's say, because of my position with the YouTube channel, I don't have to take a side. I don't have to take, I'm firmly on this side, or I'm firmly over here. I can just sit here and try to explain everyone's position. Now, again, it's not that I totally agree with Dr. Hunt that if the Fed has to abide by the Federal Reserve Act, that would be most likely deflationary. But again, just to answer your question specifically, where I see things different from Dr. Hunt is I don't think they're going to, I don't think they are abiding by it right now as we speak. And B, I don't think they'll abide by it in the future. I think they'll totally ignore it. And therefore, I agree, again, with Dr. Lacey Hunt, not about deflation, but about inflation. Because if you listen to Dr. Hunt, he'll argue for inflation just as well as he argues for deflation. But the line in the sand for him is the Fed being able to use bank reserves as legal tender. And now that definition is a moving target, right? I don't know if he's talking about the deposits in the real economy, bank liabilities like we talked about before. I don't know if he's just talking about the ability for banks to trade the bank reserves back and forth to one another in trade for financial assets. I'm not sure. But so I agree with him on deflation. I agree with him on inflation about how it would play out. It's just I see it differently, that the one barrier that he has between deflation and inflation, I think the Fed has already crossed it. And I think that they're going to be more than willing to cross it in the future. Okay, guys, I got to get some lunch and get off to another live stream in Rebel Capitalist Pro to answer some member questions. So if you guys haven't, make sure you check out Rebel Capitalist Pro. That's the online forum I have with research from Lynn Alden, Chris McIntosh. We do live streams over there. It's an online community, very similar to Bigger Pockets, where you can go in there and participate. Of course, my community's 10 times better than Bigger Pockets, but you'll see that when you get over there. Go to georgegammon.com/pro. Gene has set up a 1-week trial for $1. You can't beat it. And we'll see you in the forums over there. Now, I want to give some shout outs to everyone that has been here to the end of the live stream. We had, I think, almost 1,200 people today at one point. So thanks a lot, guys. Arthur, where did Arthur go? There he is, Arthur Martinez. Hey, Arthur is here on the live stream. He's here every live stream, and he's going to be there in Rebel Capitalist Pro on that live stream. Always very active. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Arthur. I appreciate it. And High Viz Capitalist, he's another one we answered. He actually had a YouTube question that was really cool the other night, and he's also someone that's always in these live streams and over in Rebel Capitalist Pro. But Gerald, thanks for being here. Eric, Brendan, Pay me money bags or pay me money bagas. Off on a tangent. Yeah, that should be my username. Isaac, Bot King, Alexander, Tactius, Jim, Kim, I always see here as well. Thanks, Kim, for hanging out. The Gemini, Xavier, Mark. I think that's, I'm sure that's not it, guys. But that's all I have time for. Thanks for joining me on today's live stream, and I will see you on the next video.